For a while now, I've been tossing around the idea of replacing the two original lead acid batteries that came in this rig with a lithium ion battery. Well, it just so happens that the folks from GoldenMate recently reached out to me wanting to send me one of their 100 amp hour lithium ion batteries for review. They did send this to me at no charge, and all they're asking me, again with all of our other review videos, is that we do an unbiased review on this thing and share it with you guys. So that's exactly what we're gonna do. I have no initial thoughts on this battery right now because up until they reached out to me, I'd actually never even heard of them. So I have no idea what to expect, but we're gonna take a look at the features of this battery. We're gonna get it installed and we're gonna do a little bit of load testing on it to make sure that it lives up to the capabilities that GoldenMate says that this battery has. So today we're just going to talk about the specs on this battery, what it's capable of doing, and then we're going to get it installed. I currently don't have a standalone inverter to hook this up to do any kind of load testing on it. As you guys know, I use my EcoFlow power stations in the rig as a backup source of power, which means I don't have that standalone inverter, but I do have it on order and we should have it here in the next couple of days where I'll be able to do some load testing on this thing. So having said all of that, let's just get right into the specs and the capabilities of this battery. Now, I have written them all down because I think it's important that we get the specs right on the video. So I'm just gonna read a lot of this right off the card. And I'm not gonna go into all of the specs and I'm not gonna go into every detail about this battery, but I'm gonna hit the highlights that I think are important as it applies to a battery installed in an RV. So first of all, this is the GoldenMate Orion 1000 100 amp hour battery. GoldenMate claims that this thing's got 5,000 deep cycles in it. So what that means is basically you should be able to get 5,000 cycles out of this thing at 100% depth of discharge, which means you should be able to take it from 100% to 0% 5,000 times. They also claim that this battery has got 15,000 cycles in it at 60% depth of discharge. Now, obviously nobody's gonna either discharge their battery 100% or discharge it 60%. It's always gonna be something in between, but those are the specs GoldenMate is giving us, and I'm obviously not gonna be able to really put any of that to the test, not anytime soon anyway. Now let's get into what I think is one of the more important things to look at when we're looking at these lithium ion batteries, and that's the safety of the product itself. So this thing's got 25 plus protections built into it through its battery monitoring system, or its BMS. And I'm not gonna go over all of them, but I am gonna go over pretty much the big standard ones that everybody should be looking at when they're considering a lithium ion battery. And I've picked really 5 of these as the main or basic protections that we're looking for from the BMS system. And that's overcharge, over discharge, the overcurrent, the high temperature, and then short current protection. The BMS system in this battery is going to provide all 5 of those basic protections, plus it's going to have over 20 other protections and alarms or warnings from that BMS system. The next feature here is the fact that this thing's got Bluetooth monitoring in it. Now it says it's got Bluetooth 5.0. I'm not up on my current versions of Bluetooth, but that seems to be pretty good to me. But I did just want to take a quick look at the capabilities via Bluetooth monitoring for this thing and its app. So some of the things that we can monitor via that Bluetooth app is the state of charge, the depth of discharge. We can look at the voltage, the current. We can see the temperature of the battery, and then we can also determine the capacity of the battery. So those are all some very important things that I think all of us are going to want to monitor in one of these rigs, especially when you're out there boondocking. You really need to be able to keep tabs on the state of your battery and the status of your battery at any given time. And then this next set of features, I'm just going to read it straight out of the manual here because I forgot to write this down earlier, but I want to talk about this LCD display that's on top here. There are a number of things that we can monitor straight from that display without having to connect it via Bluetooth to see what's going on. So we'll start with the most obvious parameter that I think we all want to be able to have our finger on at any time, and that's how much juice is left in our battery. So right in the middle, we've got the power display, right? That's going to tell us what percentage of battery is remaining. And then there's a ring around the outside of that that will turn red, apparently, when you get to a low state of charge in this battery. We've got the discharge state, we've got high and low temperature protection indications, and we've got the discharge power. So the discharge power just meaning how much power that battery is outputting at any given time. Over here on the right, we've got the charge state, or the input onto the battery. We've got the charge display, and then on the lower right, we've got the charging power. So again, it's just monitoring or showing you how much power is going into the battery when you're charging it. And then the last couple of features or specs that I want to talk about here are some temperature specs. So this thing can be charged anywhere between 32 degrees Fahrenheit all the way up to 122 degrees Fahrenheit. It can be discharged between -4 degrees Fahrenheit and all the way up to 140 degrees. It can be stored anywhere between 14 degrees Fahrenheit all the way up to 122 degrees. So that's very important when we get into those really hot or really cold climates. We want to know exactly what kind of temperatures our batteries can withstand. So there are other specs on that in the manual. I'll let you go look at those yourself if you choose to get one of these. But for now, we're going to cut with all of the specs and the features here. I think I hit all of the big ones that most people are going to be interested in, and we're going to get this battery installed and see what it looks like once I get it in there in the front storage area. All right, before we get to that installation though, I just wanted to point out the rest of what comes with this battery. And it's not much, but it does come with a couple of things here. So obviously, first we've got the user's manual. It's a pretty decent user manual as far as user manuals go. I find a lot of them pretty useless, but this one's not too bad. It comes with a couple of lugs to get you going if you need these for your cables. And then it comes with a couple of communication cables here, and you got a couple of communication ports on the front here. So that's what it comes with. Like I said, not much, but I wanted to make sure that I got that in here. All right, now that I got the old batteries out of there, one more thing that I wanted to do before we get the new battery in is I wanted to compare the weights of a standard lead acid battery versus this lithium ion battery. They say their battery is 31 pounds. So let's just weigh the two and see what the difference is. So we'll start first with the lead acid battery. Okay, so there you have it. The lead acid battery was about 50 pounds. The new lithium ion battery is about 30 pounds. So you're looking at 20, or I think it was actually almost 21 pounds difference between the two batteries. So in my case, I'm going to be, because I'm going to one lithium ion battery, which is equal to 2 lead acid batteries as far as how far you can actually discharge them, right? Lead acid batteries, you never want to really discharge them more than 50%. So for one lead acid battery, 100 amp hour lead acid battery, you've only got about 50 amp hours in there. So I've got 2 of them, so I've got 100, and I'm going to a 100 amp hour lithium ion battery, but I can discharge that thing all the way down to 0. So I'm not losing any capacity here, but I am gaining, what is that, about 70 pounds, or I'm shedding about 70 pounds, right? So I'm getting rid of 100 pounds and I'm bringing on about 30 pounds. So I'm shedding about 70 pounds. So that's really good. Obviously, for no matter if you're using this or in a RV or a boat, whatever, it's far less weight. right, so pretty easy installation there. You know, nothing fancy, nothing crazy. It's just a battery, right? Basically, all I did was I just reused the bottom half of this box over here, and I was a little concerned whether this battery was going to fit inside of there or not, but it actually fits perfect. It's nice and tight and secure in there, so it's not going to be shifting around or anything like that. The extra wires that you probably noticed I took off, the extra cables, are from the parallel configuration of the lead acid batteries. Obviously, I wanted to maintain a 12-volt system there, so they were in parallel. So a couple of those cables, right, where the jumper cables going from cell to cell. A couple of other cables that you saw me take off were from my charge controller. And again, because I use the EcoFlow power systems, I don't even use my charge controller at all. So I just went ahead and just kind of zip tied those up and put them back here. Again, I'll have to figure out what to do with those long term. So that leaves the only cables then attached to the battery, right, obviously are from the coach DC system, the positive and the negative. And then this cable right here goes to my Halo View TPMS repeater. It's actually a lot cleaner in here now. I kind of like it a little bit better, but it's all hooked up now. I still have the battery disconnect open, so we're not really drawing any load from this. We're not charging it or anything, but that's the next step. So I'm going to go in there and I'm going to shut that battery disconnect, and we're going to be looking at the app here, and we should see this battery start to charge via that Bluetooth app. So let's do that now. All right, there we go. It's up and running. The converter is sending juice into the battery. So looks like we've got about 28 amps going in, a little shy of 400 watts at this point. And it looks like I'm gonna assume that the full of time means that's how much time is left until the battery is fully charged. And you can see in here, these are all the parameters we can monitor: voltage, current, power, rated energy, and then I assume that's the recharge time, right? And it has a charging state and discharging state. So right now it indicates that the battery's charging. And at the bottom, we have our temperatures for the different sensors that we can monitor in degrees Celsius or Fahrenheit. So that's a pretty handy app to see what's going on with this battery at any given time. Now, one thing to note here is that if you are gonna upgrade to the lithium-ion batteries, then obviously you need to make sure you've got the right converter, right? Because some converters aren't set up or capable of charging lithium-ion batteries. And yes, there is a difference there. There's a difference in the how it charges it and to what voltage it charges it, all of that good stuff. So you gotta make sure you've got the right converter. I looked mine up, and mine's the kind where I don't even have to touch it. It'll sense what kind of battery is on there, and it will charge appropriately, whether it's one of the lead acid or lithium ion, whatever the case is. So I really didn't have to touch anything there, but you always want to make sure you check what your converter is capable of before you put a new type of battery in. And then the last thing to take a look at here is just the built-in screen or built-in display on the battery itself. You can see down here, we're charging at about 375 watts, and we're about 83%. And then it also shows us that we are charging. It's got that little charging battery symbol on it. So the next part of this, like I said before, is we want to actually test this battery. We want to put it under some load and see how it performs. Again, it's got a capacity of 100 amp hours or 1248 watt hours. So when I get that new inverter here in a couple of days, we'll be able to get some load hooked up to this thing and see how it performs. Okay, the battery has been installed for a few days now, maybe even a week or so, and so far we haven't had any issues with it. However, we really haven't put it to the test either. And I finally got my inverter delivered. I got it all set up, it's installed, it's ready to go. So today, we are gonna put this battery to the test. Now, a little bit of a caveat with that. I would have preferred to max the battery out on its discharge rate, but I'm not able to do that. The breaker that I had to install in line between the battery and the inverter is only a 60 amp DC breaker. So I'm only going to be able to pull about 60 DC amps out of that battery via the inverter. Now I am going to replace that DC breaker with the proper size, but until I get one of those, I've just got to deal with the 60 amps that I've got. Now, that's not the end of the world. We're still going to test this battery, and what we're going to do is, because that's a 60 amp breaker, I can only put about 700 watts through this 1000 watt inverter. So we're going to draw as much as we can, right around that 700 watts out of this battery, and we're just going to see how long it will last with that 700 watts. We can do a little bit of calculation to figure out what it should be at 700 watts, and then we'll compare that to what we end up with as a final display on this thing, as to how many watts it outputted and how long it lasts and all that good stuff. So we can compare calculations versus reality when we're all done with this. All right, so what we've got here is the battery started out at about 98%, and it says it's drawing about 730 watts. Now, my inverter app tells me that we are pulling about 670 watts. So obviously there's a little bit of DC load coming off of this battery that's going to be separate from the inverter, but this is where we're starting. And what we're using for a load here, for the majority of the load, is I've just got a space heater running inside, and I plugged that in initially to a kilowatt meter, and it was pulling right at about 600 watts. So we've got about 600 watts coming from that heater, and then we've got some miscellaneous loads going on in there, not much, but Candace is on the computer, so that's drawing a little bit of load. So that's where we're starting here. The battery wattage is really what we are going to be interested in, so that 730 watts or so, and we'll just see how long the battery can sustain that amount of load before essentially it's just going to shut off at some point, and then it'll turn the inverter and everything else off. All right, and the last thing we want to do here is to calculate how long we think this thing's going to last before the battery essentially turns itself off. So GoldenMate says that the battery is rated at 1280 watts. Now, we started out at 98%. That's pretty close to 100%, but we want to take that into account if we're going to get as accurate as possible, I guess. So let's work through this on the calculator. So that 1280 watts, we multiply that times 0.98 to get the true capacity of what it was when it started at that 98%. So that's going to be about 1254 watt hours of power out of this battery. And just by sitting here and looking at it, it looks like we're averaging about 740 watts worth of power being supplied by the battery to the system. So what we want to do is just take that 1254 and divide that by the 740, and that's going to give us about 1.69 hours on this battery. And if we do some quick math there, we take 1.69 times 60, so that's about 101 minutes. So we're looking at what, an hour and 41 minutes of time on this battery. So we'll see what it looks like once it actually gets down to zero and the whole thing shuts off. We'll compare our calculated hour and 40 minutes to whatever my timer says, which I've got going in the background here. All right, we're going on about an hour and 36 minutes. This thing says it's got about 1% left, about a minute. So this thing should be turning off here real soon. And I don't think the screen on the battery is going to tell us how many watt hours were expended. But like I said before, we're averaging about 740 watts of power that's being provided by the battery. It's going down anywhere from about 710 watts all the way up to about 770 watts, and it just kind of keeps fluctuating back and forth. So I'm going to use that number of about 740. And once this is done, what we'll do is we'll just calculate that out, the 740 watts times the number of minutes that it was providing power, and that'll give us the total watt hours that were provided by the battery in that amount of time. All right, so I've got the inverter is now beeping at me, which means it's probably telling me that voltage, the input voltage from the battery, is getting too low. It's supposed to go down to 11 volts before the inverter shuts down, I think is what the manual said. So we may not even get to the whole capacity of the battery before that inverter shuts off. I'm sitting at about 11.2 volts right now, and it's dropping fairly quickly. 11.1 volts. All right, we just hit 11 volts on the battery, so this inverter may shut down. All right, 10.9 volts. There we go. So the inverter just shut off. So the battery is really no longer discharging. There's a little bit of load still on it, but the battery is, but the inverter has shut off before the battery shut off. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, and as far as how long it lasted, so pretty much checks with exactly what we calculated in the beginning. I've got about an hour and 42 minutes here. So as far as that calculation goes, this thing did exactly what it was supposed to do. It actually lasted longer than the inverter did. The inverter, like I said, would only go down to about 11 volts. So I think that's going to wrap up the test, and I need to get everything kind of put back to normal and get this battery charged back up. And I'm kind of curious to see how long that's going to take. So maybe I'll start a timer for that as well to see how long it takes for the battery to fully charge. Basically, it's down to 1% all the way up to 100%. All right, so I think that's going to do it. This thing's charged back up to 100%. We got there in a little over 3 hours. So we went from 0 to 100% charge on this battery in about 3 hours. So that's about what I expected, so I don't think there's anything unusual there either. So I want to wrap this all up by first saying thanks to GoldenMate for sending me this battery to test out and review. And this is my first standalone lithium-ion battery. Again, I've got some in my EcoFlow units, but those are totally different. So this is my first standalone lithium-ion battery. It seems to be a pretty solid product. I don't see any reason why I'm going to want to switch this out anytime soon. Like I said before, I shed about 70 pounds because I was able to get rid of my 2 lead acid batteries. And now I've got a lithium ion battery that I can discharge all the way down to 0% if that's what it takes. All right, so overall, even though I've only had this battery for, I think, about a week now, haven't had any issues with it. And overall, I'm extremely happy with it. It seems to be very solidly built, and I didn't have any performance issues today while giving it that test discharge. It lasted at least as long as I expected it to. So overall, I think this is just a really good product.